Welcome back. Now, there are a lot of MIDI controllers available on the market, but the Drop, a new MIDI controller from Neuzeit Instruments, who you might know from such eurorack modules as the Warp, which I have in my case over here, is one of the most advanced that I have come across. And the reason for that is it combines all of the best features you want to have in a MIDI controller in terms of connectivity, in terms of mapping of controls, with this innovative snapshot grid here, where you can capture snapshots of different positions for faders and knobs. But then more importantly, you can either jump between them using a delay to slowly fade from one position to another, or build up to a clock synchronized drop for that all important club night where you need to bring the roof down. Now, rather than doing a deep dive on the controller and going into all of the menus and features, because it is very advanced and it would actually take a long time, what I'm going to do is just do a very quick getting started, setting it up with my Oxi One, and in this case, a modular case. Now, I know there are other videos coming out. I know BoBeats is working on one, and I also know Midlife Synthesist is working on one, and they will probably cover it from a different perspective. Because there's a lot to cover, I've included chapter markers down below, so feel free to jump to whichever section you want to look at. Now, the Drop itself comes with CV outs and CV ins, which you can, of course, map to any of the controls on the front of it. But that is fairly limiting. After all, we want to control far more than two things over here on our case. We also get 4 MIDI outs, which can be either TRS A or B, because of course we have 2 competing standards for MIDI over TRS. We have a USB port that you can use to host devices, so we have 2 of those, and this one here also allows you to power the device. So for the purposes of controlling our modular, we need a way to convert MIDI to control voltages, gates, triggers, whatever we need. And for that, I'm going to use the Bafako MIDI Thing V2 over here, which is buried under this massive cabling I've already installed in the case. And we're going to use this to convert MIDI coming from Drop to various control voltages, and also to merge the MIDI from the Oxi One sequencer and bring that into the case to play some voices over here. So first things first, how are we going to connect all these things together? Well, the quick way to get started is use the fact that the Oxi One has a USB-C port here on the side. So I'm going to patch this USB cable in here, and I'm going to hook it up to the USB 1 port over here. The advantage of this is we now have bidirectional MIDI connectivity between the Oxi One and the Drop. The reason is you might want to merge the notes from the Oxi One through the Drop to send them out into the modular. So you can do MIDI to CV conversion here, say. Or you might want to control the sequencer on the Oxi One using the Drop to control some of the sequencer parameters. We'll look at that a little bit later on. Now, the nice thing is the Drop has both internal clock and can be clock synced to an external device. Press Shift and clock up here, and this wonderful screen shows us the different clock sources. Right now, it's set to internal, which means the internal clock is running. The way we navigate this menu is by turning this knob and pressing the button. So I just press the button, press the knob, I should say, and I can change the different parameters. So we are just taking the external MIDI with start-stop messages, and we're going to leave that mapped to device 1. Now, it says inactive right now, and the reason for that is we haven't set up any devices. So let's look at how you set up the Drop to actually control different devices. Before we do that, it's often worth doing a little bit of MIDI debugging just to make sure it's all connected. So how do we know this is actually working? If you press play, you go back to the main play menu. Turning the knob jumps between a couple of different screens, which we'll get to in a second. And if we get to the very last screen here, we have a MIDI monitor. I hit play. We're just going to monitor the MIDI coming in. You see some notes are playing here, and we have MIDI coming in from the Oxi One into the Drop. What's next? How do we actually use this with devices? Well, first things first, let's go into menu, and you see here we have devices and mapping. So that's pretty much the order you're going to use it in. Let's go ahead and create a new device. Press the knob to select. We select to turn on. We can give it a new name, and let's just quickly go in here. Now, believe it or not, you can hook up a USB keyboard to this, and you can type in the name of things. So it's a lot faster than navigating like this to type in the name, but I'm just going to do it this way just to show you it is actually relatively straightforward on the device. Oxi One, we press save. You could change the channel by turning it. Now, you can both input and output to these devices. So what we will do is choose the output port. Now, you notice here how I'm selecting USB 1 all the way through TRS 1 to 4. You see USB 1 shows up because the Oxi One has shown up there. How many devices can it support? Well, 8. You have 8 different slots here for devices. So whereas the Oxi One will be in slot 1, we'll put the Bafaco in slot 2 and the Warp in slot 3. And each knob can send to one or more devices, or each fader or each control here. So I could turn this, have it go to the Oxi One, the Bafaco and the Warp all at the same time. Now that we have our devices defined, we need to get into mapping. And this is where we start thinking about our performance and what we want to actually change. Because after all, there's no point mapping the controls to anything unless you know what it is you want to do when you're performing. So let's simulate a sort of a build and drop scenario to give you a really good example of where drop shines. The name is, after all, drop. So we might as well try and do a build and drop. We're going to take a nice kind of deep bass that you hear coming out of Warp over here. And it's got a lot of range of sound, because if I bring up the detune, we can get really gnarly sounds. So we can play with that. Let's start, first of all, with that. Then what I want to do is maybe send MIDI from the drop while I'm playing with this sound over here into the Oxi One so that I can actually change the sequencer and maybe play it faster. Back to our menu, we go to mapping and we choose a controller by sliding it with your finger. Now we press the button to enable it. Now I had been setting this up previously, but basically what I want to do is go into my external mapping here on the Oxi One. I'm going to go down to learn. I just move the controller and it sends CC51 on channel 1. Great. I'm now going to assign that to an internal destination, which is the division modulation on the sequencer. Watch what happens now when I hit play. Things can get real crazy real quick. I might just turn that down just a little bit there. Great. Now as I slide this up, I'm sending MIDI in here and changing how I sequence. Now, I also want this controller to change the warp and detune parameters. Like that. Great. How do we do that? Now, let's go over to another slot. Each controller can send up to 8 destinations, so we go up to this slot here. Now, again, I had been setting this up, and what I have this on is the Bafaco, so I've mapped that device, so the output that goes into the Bafaco. And again, it's CC51. And in this case, I have the Bafaco's output here, and I'm going to send that value, converted into control voltage, into aux send 2 here. I think it's on there, which corresponds to sending that into Oniri. Let's take a listen to what it sounds like. Now we're speeding up the sequencer, and we're also sending a CC value here to this send level. And you know what? I hadn't planned for this, but I really like the sound of that resonator. I'm going to mult this. I'm going to mult this value. We're improvising now. And I'm also going to patch that into the resonator over on the resonator level here, over on Oniri. So let's now take a look. Great. Now we get the sense of something happening. It's building up. It's getting faster. The sound is changing. I want to say change the detune, and this brings us to the really useful feature of the built-in preset databases. So let's go back to our devices, and when we set up Warp here on our third device, we didn't actually bother telling it. I'm going to scroll down. We didn't tell it that we had a preset. So let's go ahead and set preset. We scroll down to Neuzeit. Look at all these presets we have in here. We go down to Neuzeit Instruments, and there's Warp. Click that, and now we have defined the device called Warp, which is on this output 2 here. We've said preload in all the predefined CC values, so I don't have to worry about doing the mapping by looking up the manual. Because we've now associated that preset with this device, I can now go into my mapping page, press preset, and load up different presets corresponding to different devices. And in this case, we are going to scroll all the way back here and go for detune pot virtual CV. And that will affect the detune. Now let's take a listen. Whoa, let's turn that down. Now that we have our mappings all set up and our devices defined, it's time to have some fun with saving snapshots and jumping between them and using the drop functionality. So snapshots work by pressing save, and then you save into a slot here of the faders that you've changed. Whatever current positions are here can get saved into a snapshot. Then when you are in jump mode, pressing the snapshot will jump to it. Now you can fade in, for example, using this knob. So let's take a listen. So now if I want to instantaneously jump to, say, this snapshot, which changes this fader here, and then this is this fader being brought up, which changes the delay sound. And this is my fallback. Let's say I bring in this delay. Now this is, we're slowly jumping to this over the course of this line there. So to save this fader here, I have to catch the values, and now I can save this one to here. See, now if I go back to here, we fade out that kick, and here is changing the sound on warp. Here's that big build up, and there's where we ultimately get to. Right, so we've seen how we can jump between snapshots and use this to fade between them. What about if we want to automate that? And that's where drop comes in. This allows you to set the number of bars the drop will take. So we could set it to 8 bars, 16, 4, or 3 if you really wanted. And we come down. We count it down to here. Now we're going to count down 4. And it's instantaneous. Drops are instantaneous. We could also, say, create a new place to drop to. That one there. And then we drop to a clean state. We can drop to this one here, which is the kick just in with a clean, no delay sound. And here's the kick with some delay sound. So that shows you how the jump and drop and snapshots all work together with these predefined mappings. So it does take a bit of work to get this all set up, but once you get it set up, it is really, really flexible. So let's wrap up with a few closing thoughts, pros and cons, and answer the question, should you buy it? Is it right for you? After all, it is a controller made for a MIDI setup. So if you have MIDI devices, you really are going to find this very useful. So if you have Electron boxes or anything else like that, this really is going to be an excellent controller to use. However, if you are working in a modular environment like I have here, you are going to want to give some thought as to what it is you want to control and how you would bring that out in your performance. If you are going to control a pure modular setup like I have here, then you're definitely going to need a MIDI to CV device. So something like the MIDI Thing V2 from Bafako, or the Bastel 1983 like I have here, which is again a MIDI to CV controller with 4 channels. You're going to need something like that to interface it directly into your modular. More and more modules, more and more polyphonic modules for sure, like the Warp, and drum modules like Fire are now coming with MIDI, and that enables you to just control them directly by using this as your kind of MIDI hub and MIDI router to these devices. In reality, it's going to come down to what you want out of a MIDI controller. The best MIDI controller I've ever used other than this one have been the Fader Foxes. The MX12 and the PC12 were staples in my setup, and to me the Drop has sort of surpassed those. It's got that quality finish, but it's nice and small, can fit in a backpack, easily powered, tons of connectivity, really complex ability to set it up, saving projects on an SD card, easily upgradable. You don't need a desktop computer to set it up, you can do it on the fly, and so far it's been fairly bug-free, pretty stable. Few little things here and there, but Neuzeit are very responsive to feedback. Well, thanks very much for watching. I appreciate if you've made it this far. Hopefully this was a good demonstration of what Drop can do, albeit a very high level one. And if you have any questions, please leave them down below in the comments. And thanks for watching.